Welcome to the Side Chat Podcast. This week I wanted to talk about an aircraft that I released a video on earlier this week, and there seemed to be quite a bit of confusion on what the hell it was. So we're going to talk about the Wirraway, and we're going to talk a bit about Australian aviation, since I've been really wanting to focus a little bit on more of the Australian side of World War II, and I think we can kill a little bit of two birds with one stone here. So first off, what the hell was a Wirraway? Wirraway was actually introduced as Australia's primary aircraft for training in 1939, and it served so until 1955, and it was used as a communications aircraft until 1959. So this thing had a very long service life, doing multiple roles. Like I said, it's a very versatile aircraft. It was used as an emergency stopgap fighter. It was used as a dive bomber, reconnaissance, and communications, like I just mentioned. By 1941, there was 7 squadrons of these things fielded. So some of the comments I saw was, what the hell is it? It looks like a Texan. It looks like a Harvard. It's actually a North American NA-16 that was, the Australians bought 2 of them by a trainer. They made their own kind of variation under license, and that's a Wirraway. So it's got some changes, but for the most part, it is a North American NA-16. The NA-16 was original. Then from there it became the Harvard and the Texan and so on. So it's kind of the same aircraft that had many kind of reinventions, and we used our original T6 Texans until like Vietnam. And the thing saw, I mean, this is a great aircraft that saw life in many countries. Not enough of them could be produced for multiple roles, like I said, training and spotting and so on. I mean, things saw action in Korea, and I believe they were used as trainers in Vietnam as well. So great aircraft. So 755 of these things were built between 1939 and 46. It used a license-built Pratt & Whitney R1340 engine that put out about 600 horsepower. So like I said, this thing is in no way overwhelming, but its service record speaks for itself. Let's get into some stats, and I'll talk about some of the armament, and then we'll go into the history of this guy. And this is a round, if you're watching the video, that was quite hilarious that Kobe and I had the other night, so stick around. The round's worth watching alone by itself. Wirraway is a great plane to fly in War Thunder, if you haven't already done so. So this stats aren't overwhelming, but like I said, 600 horsepower engine, top speed of 220 miles an hour or 354 km/h. Cruising speed was 155, 250 km/h, so yeah, 155, that's, it's what cars will do easily. Ceiling was 23,000 feet or 7,000 meters. So, like I said, this wasn't overwhelming. This plane was used because it was all they had. Armament had 2 Vickers Mark V 303s that were kind of on top of the engine that fired through the propeller, and 1 303 Vickers Go machine gun that was used on a kind of turret swivel in the back. And that's not actually a gunner, that's an observer seat that was just had a gun added to it. Later, Wirraways could be added with 2 Browning 303 caliber machine guns under the wings. And then you had 2 500-pound bombs or 2 250-pound bombs. And in War Thunder, you could see me, I was flying with the 2 500s and the 2 250s. That's a later war configuration where they were able to, in the game, seems to be like a later model of the Wirraway where it had different wings where it could hold more weight. So, anyway, just a little thing. So, production. This is where plane kind of gets a little confusing. There was, I don't know, you can just call Wirraway a Wirraway to be simple, and I don't think we're going to see 7 variants of the Wirraway coming to War Thunder anytime soon. But there was basically 7 major marks, like Spitfire Mark 1 or Mustang Mark 1. Well, there was a Wirraway Mark 1, Mark 3, Mark 5, Mark 7, whatever. Australians call them CA1, CA3, CA5, CA10, and so on. CA1 was the original order, 40 were made. And then the way Australian contracts work is that every time they built more aircraft, they got a new number. So CA3 was the same as CA1, 60 were built. CA5 was the same, 32 built. And then 7, 8, and 9 are all the same. And there was 100, 200, and 185 made of those. So those are all basically the same aircraft. You'll just see different numbers attached to it because it was basically build lots. CA-10A was an uncompleted bomber proposal with a different style wing, and I believe that's the wing that you'll see in War Thunder right there. and that was added to all the existing aircraft, and those became CA-20s. Okay, so I believe that the one in War Thunder, I could be wrong, is a CA-20 variant, and that would make sense, or at least that's what they based it off of. CA-16, which was the last run, which is kind of like the definitive Wirraway, 135 of those were built. Those had the larger die brakes, and then of course I had the larger bomb load that you see here. So this plane doesn't have die brakes. I believe it's CA-20. Britain fielded one squadron of these in 1941 and 1942. We're actually going to talk about those soon. And then the U.S. operated a few of these for a short time in the 8th Air Force as HQ. I believe they were probably runners or some type of utility aircraft. But kind of, I didn't know the U.S. bought any or acquired some. I don't know. I'm sure we traded stuff, so. Alright. So let's get into kind of the lore of the Wirraway. And why is it so important? And you can see me trying to turn fight in the game. It's pretty ridiculous. But so the Wirraway first saw combat in January 6th of 1942. It was deployed to forward bases in Malaya. It first saw air-to-air combat in that week with a Mavis flying boat, an HSK. There's no record of it. There's a couple, like, I guess you call it reported possibly damages to Japanese aircraft, but there was no shoot downs until later. But this thing was just fielded, like I said, just as a stopgap fighter because the Boomerang did not come around for another 2.5, 3 years. And the P-40s from the U.S. were not going to be seen for a bit. So this little bugger was all they had. And there were some very brave British and Australian pilots who made the best of what they had. Moving on, these planes shot there, and then 2 weeks later, 8 Wirraways versus 100 Japanese fighters and bombers. And even though they were hopelessly outclassed, outgunned, and outnumbered, Wirraways and their pilots did their best to just keep holding that gap from the Japanese invading army. Like I said, Australia did the best they can. They absolutely did, and they stopped the mainland invasion. They were terrified of a mainland invasion of Australia. And their army and their Wirraways. I mean, the army and the navy did quite a bit of work, but the Wirraway pilots did their absolute best to keep Japan back. Most famous combat came when pilot officer John Archer shot down a Zero on December 26, 1942. I've heard this story mentioned in the game quite a bit from players. I've seen it mentioned in the forums once in a while. Now I finally took the time to kind of in-depth research the story behind the John Archer kill. It turned out it was possibly a Ki-43, and that's pretty well documented. So I've always heard it referenced as a Zero, but actually digging into it, it was a Ki-43 Oscar. I think that came because Archer originally reported it as a Zero kill, but digging into the facts, it was actually a Ki-43. They dug up, or they were able to recover the Ki-43 aircraft in the pilot's body. He's actually buried. They did a proper military burial for the pilot, and they recovered some intelligence. So it is documented when they recovered the aircraft what it actually was, and it was a confirmed kill. So the story goes, they were flying recon over a Japanese wreck off of Ghana. I hope I said that right. Was able to spot a Japanese fighter about 1,000 feet below him. Archer dove straight down at the aircraft and was able to fire a nice long burst into the enemy aircraft. He then watched it kind of tip over and then dropped about 600 yards or so, 600,000 yards into the ocean, and that was kind of a firm kill. And then they went out and recovered it. Archer was later stated that he acted impulsively and was lucky that he got such an effective first burst. Little known fact though is that he actually received a U.S. Army Silver Star from the Allied General New Guinea for his actions. So that's kind of neat. They did give out Silver Stars, but not too often you probably see the U.S. handing them out to an Australian pilot. So good for him. I know that's kind of an Australian, I guess you call him folk hero, but it's something to be very, very proud of though. And I'm gonna stop talking about that for a second because this is one of the reasons I want to include this video. So you can see here I'm getting outclassed by the HE-1 Chols who've been watching this in the BF-109s. My team is mostly dead except for P-26, so I decided to go do the most evasive, retarded thing a Wirraway could ever do. And that's why this plane, if you have some extra Golden Eagles and you want to have fun at low-tier British, this is the absolute plane to do that. And because if I don't know what the definition of trolling is. I mean, you call it ultimate defensive flying, but I was basically doing this to troll to see what would happen. And so, oh, this is I have meant an opinion that's in a fail montage or doing its own video, but I thought this would make a fun, clip in the podcast. So, yeah, my plan is just to do little figure eights and little circles around these bridges and see what the 109's HE-112s would do. And, well, this 109, he met a tree. So that's one down. So, just doing what a Wirraway can. I have no ammo, of course, in the front guns, and I don't trust that rear 303 Vickers machine gun to kill him. So here comes the HE-112. I just watched a 109 smack into a bridge. And this guy he tries to get a little clever by trying to time when I'm coming in and out of the bridge pylons. And this is just too funny. So I immediately see it and I try to go right back under. And he's just trying, there he goes. You see some rounds smashing behind me. Oh, back under. This thing flies so slow and it turns so well that in this case, being slow is actually a plus category because you fly at speeds that other aircraft can't stall, that stall and die at. So, go Wirraway. Go Wirraway. Right, where's that HE-112? There he is behind me. This guy's just getting pissed. Like I said, it's me and a P-26 left, and this is kind of embarrassing. I would fly underneath the, between like the suspension pieces there, but I just don't trust War Thunder's hit boxes. My chance I'd hit something that hits him as a wall, but there he goes. He tries to fly through it, and he tumbles through it, loses a wing, and he's dead. So that's 2 aircraft lost to the bridge, and basically, I think I had 1 or 2 kills at this point, so magic of the Wirraway. Anyway, back to the aircraft I was speaking about, John Archer's aircraft. Like I said, he did get the Silver Star, and then I didn't know, but this Wirraway is actually still in existence today. It collided with a parked Wirraway when it was taxiing or taking off or something, and it was withdrawn from service, and now it's at the Bradbury Aircraft Hall on display. So I believe that's probably somewhere in Australia. I'll have to Google that. But it's a very neat aircraft, and I've always had kind of a fascination with it. I actually saw one last fall at a private collection here near Florida. Kermit Weeks' Fancy of Flight. He actually has one. It's in decent shape, I guess, for an aircraft that's this old. I don't know the story behind it, but he is holding a Wirraway that its wings are taken off right now, but the wings are in half decent shape. And I really hope he gets around to either restoring it or trading it to somebody trading or selling it to somebody who can restore it. But it's actually a pretty, I mean, I didn't expect a massive aircraft, but the thing's actually a pretty small aircraft when you have it next to other warbirds. And like I said, this thing was meant to be a trainer. I love things like, if you listen to the channel, I'm obsessed with aircraft that can do multiple roles. That's why I love things like the Sky Raider, the Panther, the Hellcat, the P-47, planes that find a niche and then, they're designed to be a fighter and then they become a bomber or a dive bomber. That's how you stay useful in an aircraft arsenal. And this little guy did the best he can. Like I said, the Boomerang is slightly based off this. I believe that the Boomerang's more based off the kind of more of the T6 Texan or the Harvard, the later configurations. And the main difference between this thing and a Boomerang is that the Boomerang has different wings. It doesn't have the back seat, of course, and it has a much bigger engine, but it is from the same aircraft lineage. And the Boomerang didn't come until 1943, and the Wirraways actually stayed in frontline service as a fighter until the P-40 Warhawks were delivered. And then Australia went on to things like building their own Spitfires. They had their own P-51s that they built. Their P-51s, I believe, were using they were license built. What the frick did they do now? I actually believe they went back to, I think they were Griffin-powered Mustangs, if I remember right. They use some type of engine. I can't remember off the top of my head. They have some very weird variant of like the D or C that they put their own like engines in that they had at the time. And they were license-built Merlins or they were license-built Griffins. I can't remember off the top of my head. I think they were just license-built Merlins. But they are kind of some strange Mustang variants. And then they did their own, they did lots of stuff their own. But that's one thing about Australia is that they took other people's aircraft and made their own. The Beaufighter Mark 21 is a Australian copy of the Beaufighter Mark 10. And then you have, couple others that I'm just not remembering off the top of my head real well. They did license built Mosquitoes, and then they had some Blitums, I believe Beauforts and all that. So a very proud country who was able to kind of scrap together aircraft, and they actually made quite a few of these Warways for the time. I'm actually kind of surprised to see the numbers. Like I said, 755 total built. Those are very respectable numbers. Just checking my notes here. Make sure I'm not talking my ass. I think I said that right. Yeah, I believe it was like 700, 800 or so of these things built. Yeah, 755 built. Yep. So, very impressive, and I'm trying to see. I do actually end up eventually winning this round. It just takes about an hour of this guy flying around with me, but the AA eventually does shoot him down. And then I was able to hunt down the last ground vehicle, which was actually a landing craft. But this is a pretty fun little Wirraway round. Like I said, I encourage all of you. It doesn't cost much. Like, if you don't have Eagles, they do these free Eagle events where, like, if you get 3 kills and then they give you like 100 golden Eagles or something. I think this plane only costs like 200 golden Eagles. When it's on sale, it's like or it's like 400. When they do 50% off, it's 200 golden Eagles. If you don't own a premium aircraft, this is the one to get. Seriously, it's cheap, it's fun. The rewards suck, but like I said, when I get pissed off in War Thunder, this is now my go-to. Jump in, have some fun, kind of troll the HE-112s, 109s, and zeros. It's a lot of fun. And like I said, I have nothing but respect for the Wirraway pilots of the British and Australian Air Forces that flew them. And hopefully this, hopefully we can talk more about the Australian Army in a later podcast. But I just want to give a little bit of love to Australia. And then next week, I'm probably looking at doing some type of off-topic podcast, and then we will go back hard into some military history / War Thunder after that. So, thanks for listening, and take care.